Welcome teachers, parents and adults to the second of this 5-minute movement break series. This activity is also in 4 steps and each step can be a 5-minute movement break. You can help children be creative by providing structure and ideas and by giving them the freedom to create their own responses. Remember, with improvisation, children do not have to move to a count, they do not have to remember or repeat anything, and they do not need to try to be perfect. Ask children to imagine that they are inside a spherical bubble that stretches out from them as far as their fingers can reach. And ask them to reach out to touch the surface of the bubble. Ask them to imagine that their feet are glued to one spot, so it is only their arms and torso that can move as they reach out to touch the bubble's curving surface in all directions. Now ask them to trace around the surface of their bubble, above, below, in front, behind, left, right, and all the places in between. Encourage them to alternate reaching out to touch the surface and returning back in, with tracing around the surface. Suggest that they imagine their bubble has a colour or a light shining on it, and that they can change the colour and brightness each time they move. Now let your children know that their feet are no longer totally glued to the spot. One foot needs to be on it, but the other foot can move. So they can now step 1 foot away from the spot and then return. They can lift 1 foot into the air and then return. They can also turn around as long as the turning stays on their spot. With this extra freedom, encourage them to explore how else they can move to touch and trace their bubble. Can they reach to the bubble's surface with their legs and feet, as well as their hands? Can their feet trace around the surface? Can hands and feet both reach towards or trace around the bubble's surface? Ask your children to imagine that the space inside their bubble is also filled with colour or light, and encourage them to explore how they might wish to move in the inner space of their bubble. They still need to stay in one location, and they can still reach to the surface and trace the surface, but they can also now do any other movements they wish inside their bubble. Do they want to fill their bubble with flowing, curving movements? Or strong, punching movements? Do they want to move fast and wriggly? Or slow and serenely? Encourage them to mix things up by including movements that reach to the bubble's surface, movements that trace the surface, and movements that happen within their bubble. Ask your children to imagine that their bubble can shrink and grow in size. When it shrinks to its smallest size, they have to shrink with it to stay inside the bubble. When it expands to its largest size, they can expand to fill it. Ask them to play with changing the size of their bubble and see how this affects their movements inside the bubble. Ask them to imagine 3 bubble sizes: full size, medium size, and small size. Start with the full size bubble and encourage them to do as many movements as they can in their full size bubble. Then shrink the bubble to medium size and ask them to see how many movements and types of movements they can do in their medium-sized bubble. Lastly, shrink to the small-sized bubble and challenge them to explore how much they can still move within it. Lastly, they can expand the bubble size again if they wish. This movement break can also be danced sitting, reaching to the bubble's surface, tracing the surface, moving within, and growing and shrinking the bubble.